ancient biblical prophets wrote about the future. Today, theologians are poring over those scriptures with a firm belief that their prophecies are coming to pass. Journey now into the world of eschatology on Prophecy in the News with author and lecturer J.R. Church.
On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to be discussing the recent impeachment debacle. I call it a debacle because though he was impeached, our president was not removed from office. Gary Stimman is here to discuss with me a little verse in Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20. Gary?
That chapter, J.R., talks about many things, but it pronounces woes upon a people who have lost their faith. And one of the woes in Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20, is woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. In other words, if you can imagine the idiocy of tasting sugar and saying, ooh, that's bitter. Well, that's just about the same idiocy of looking at something that's pure evil and pronouncing it to be good. And you know, that's Isaiah's statement about his own people in days of apostasy. Well, J.R., I hate to say it, but I believe that what we've seen in the House and Senate recently has shown us more about the American people than it has about one certain president of the United States, William Jefferson Clinton. It says a lot about our people that they're willing to accept what they have.
We have never before on this program or in our magazine made the statement that we believe Bill Clinton would stay in office, or made the statement that we believe Bill Clinton would be evicted from the high office of our land. But we have had our private thoughts on the matter, and Gary, I would say we weren't wrong. He's still there.
And you know, J.R., we've been talking, and other prophecy teachers for years have been talking about the evils of relativism. We've had at least 2 generations of children in the American public schools who have been raised to have very gray, shall we say, grayish opinions about right and wrong. And the general idea that you really can't pronounce something absolutely wrong until you hear the whole story. And that all ethics and morals are really relative, and don't judge me until you judge yourself. And this is essentially now the adult population of the United States, voting representatives into office who are willing to call good evil and evil good. By the way, the people who attempted to prosecute this case, this impeachment case, are, even as we speak, being spoken of as the subjects of future suits. For example, Ken Starr now is being held up as a villain. The various House managers who prosecuted the case, put it together, are being called villains. Woe to them that call evil good and good evil.
You know, for the past 25, 30 years in America, we have seen a growing menace in the news media against Christians. Christian bashing has become what I have labeled the latest American sport. No longer are jokes played out upon other segments of our society. It's all narrowed down to, it's not politically correct to have ethnic jokes and various kinds of political jokes, except for Christians. And Christians, of course, have become the whipping boy of society. It's sad to me to think, for example, a very famous preacher recently said that he believed the Antichrist would be Jewish. And boy, did he ever catch it. I just want to go on record as agreeing with him that even though Jesus was a Jew, from, I believe, the tribe of Dan, one of the 12 tribes, will come the Antichrist. And I think, because the rabbi said that he would produce the Antichrist 150 years before the birth of Christ. So, you know, what can we say?
Yeah.
Christian ministers are just, the media is just looking for a reason to try to destroy the credibility and the integrity and the character of God's ministers because they call good evil.
Yeah. Let's look for a moment at the age in which we live. Now, certainly the apostles told us that there would be really perilous times, to use Paul's words, in the last days. And I think we've come to that time, J.R., but what statement can we make about the Antichrist? I know it's very popular to ask, is he alive today? And if so, what would he look like? Well, we've written on that subject. We've talked about this a little bit. We've talked about how Daniel says he must come out of the Roman Empire. We've talked about the tribe of Dan connection, which is well documented, that in ancient days the tribe of Dan went northward up into Greece and then they migrated into Europe. Now we're talking about the tribe of Dan, not all of the 10 lost tribes. And the rabbis, as you say, in fact even pre-rabbinically, back in the days of the sages before Christ, they said that the anti-Messiah, they didn't call him an Antichrist, but the false Messiah would come out of the tribe of Dan. So what can we say about today? If you wanted to make a statement, I wouldn't name the name of any particular man as Antichrist, and I don't think you would either.
Well, not publicly anyway.
Not publicly.
But recently I was, there was a rather famous minister who was interviewed on a radio broadcast, I guess, maybe his radio broadcast, went across America, told the whole world that I believed, that J.R. Church believes Bill Clinton is the Antichrist. Well, all of that came out of a little trip at a prophecy conference in a van between the hotel and the place where we to speak. Mm-hmm. And you know how men will talk and, you know, when buddies get together, they jaw each other and, yeah, and fun around.
And speculate a little bit.
And speculate a little bit, who knows? I mean, I've got my private thoughts. But I didn't come out publicly and say that Bill Clinton was the Antichrist. But now this fellow who has a lack of wisdom, I guess, about him, decides that he wants to tell the whole world that J.R. Church believes that Bill Clinton is the Antichrist. Who knows, Gary? He may be.
Well, he may be, and I don't think we can reject that idea. But we do know that there is an Antichrist. Probably, if we're right about the times, he's probably alive today. He doesn't know who he is. Mm-hmm. I've heard many theologians make this very statement. He wouldn't be aware of who he is until the spirit of Satan enters into him, and he begins to be the prophesied son of perdition that's spoken of in the New Testament. Certainly, he would come out of some royal lineage out of Europe. I think that you've established that in your book, Guardians of the Grail. Certainly he would come out of the tribe of Dan, which is not a contradiction, since Dan migrated into Europe. So we can say that he would be of some European descent that had a little bit of the bloodline of Dan, and as we've pointed out elsewhere, a little bit of the line of the Seleucids, Antiochus Epiphanes, and you can see that in Daniel chapter 11. And so he could very well be alive today. He could come out of Europe, America, possibly South America, Canada, Australia, who knows?
Well, because of our roots in Rome and European politics, he could very well come out of the White House. I'm not saying that he is. Don't misunderstand me. You know, there's a lot of difference between a theologian who makes a statement, this is the way it is, and is dogmatic about it, and when a theologian just says off the cuff that, you know, he'll doodle, another one comes along.
Mm-hmm. Now, J.R., we do live, I think, in what the Bible speaks of as perilous times. And I want to read from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, something that I think is very important concerning the revealing of Antichrist. It says in chapter 11, "And for this cause, that is, for the revealing of the Antichrist, God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie." Now, there's something that I think we can say unequivocally today, and I want you to comment on this. I think the American people, not disregarding people around the rest of the world, the American people have been prepared to believe a lie. That is, the preparation is in place.
Yes. I feel confident that America is being set up today for the New World Order. The New World Order is going to be a world government a government, I believe, headed up one day by the Antichrist himself, whoever that might be. And since we live, Gary, in just months before the new millennium is introduced, I don't think it's out of character to speculate on political situations and the way governments are being manipulated and positioned to prepare for the rise of a one-world government and the rise of the man of sin. We know that he's going to be the key figure in this coming 7-year tribulation period. And since we are so close to the end of this millennium and the beginning of the next, I feel quite confident in what we're doing here at Prophecy in the News in considering who might be the man of sin. We have a lot more we'll talk about when we come back in just a moment. Don't go away. Let's talk about American politics for just a moment. We have seen one of the most dreadful debacles in the history of the United States. We have seen justice trampled in the streets. I don't know any other way of putting it. Daniel chapter 11 verse 37 says that one of these days there's going to be a man who will not regard the God of his fathers nor the desire of women. Who knows? Are we talking about the same man? I am not prepared to tell you that he is or that he isn't. But Gary, the interesting thing to me about the presidents of the United States is that we really don't live in a republic anymore. We don't really have Republicans and Democrats. For example, you remember all the talk about the Republicans being partisan. It was the Democrats that voted lockstep 100% to keep him in.
And I think probably everybody realizes that what we're talking about here is power. Very simply, we're not talking about truth, we're not talking about justice, very simply the exercise of power. And you know, when it comes to power, and just before the break we were talking about the dynasty of the Antichrist, for example. When it comes to power, that's how dynasties are built. And you may think that in America, in our representative republic, we don't really have dynasties. But you know, you might be surprised to learn just how some of our high leaders back through the years have been related to each other. It's interesting.
Most of the presidents have been related. They all come from the same clique. I have a book that I bought a few years ago on the ancestry of the American presidents. And it was really an eye-opener to find that, for example, George Bush is kin to 14 American presidents and near kin to the rest of them. And among those he was kin to, of course, is Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was kin to 16 American presidents and near kin to most of the rest of them.
Wow.
For example, Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford are cousins. They go back, I think, 7 generations to the same family, brother and sister, who eventually produced these two men. So wouldn't it stand to reason that when Nixon was resigning that he would pick his cousin to succeed him, Gerald Ford? But that's not all. Gerald Ford then ran against Jimmy Carter. And those two guys are cousins. Going back to the same family roots. We're talking dynasty here, folks.
Yeah.
And George Bush is kin to all 3 of them. And the interesting thing about it is George Bush goes back to Benjamin Harrison. And in this book, the Boston Genealogical Society, who published this book, said that Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton, is not kin to any of them. Of course, they didn't have any information on him. But since then, Burke's Peerage has come out and said that he is kin to the Benjamin Harrisons, which means, listen carefully, George Bush and Bill Clinton are kin.
Distant cousins.
Yeah.
How about that?
One's a Democrat, the other's a Republican. You think we have a 2-party system in America? Oh, come on.
Well, you know, the Bible, the biblical view of this, JR, is that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but we wrestle against principalities, powers, rulers of darkness in high places. In other words, there is, I guess, shall we say, real power behind the earthly thrones. And it stands to reason that power would develop in dynastic ways. Little cliques and mini cliques and people helping each other up. And first thing you know, you've got a dynasty developing, and there goes the representative republic, and it becomes a power struggle. And I think in America, we've arrived at the place where power is the most is given the most weight. If you took, for example, truth, justice, representative democracy, those are all just eclipsed by the simple word power. That's what it's all about now.
Yeah. One of these days, an Antichrist is going to come upon the scene. We don't know exactly when, and we don't know exactly who this will be. But if we live so close to the beginning of the tribulation period, as most theologians think today,
that's right,
then the Antichrist has to be around somewhere. He can't be born in the future, Gary. He's got to be of some age, as shall we say, voting age by now at least?
Oh, at least. At least voting age. You know, J.R., in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, there's a very famous verse where Paul is talking to Timothy, and he says, "This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come." And then there is this list of degenerate conditions that will exist in the last days. And I think we're seeing those right now. But, you know, what fascinates me is that this word perilous, in the last days, perilous times shall come, is translated from the Greek word kalepos, which means ragingly insane. In fact, it is the adjective used to describe the demoniac that came screaming out of the caves near the Sea of Galilee when Jesus came ashore in a boat. And here came this demoniac. Well, he was described as being ragingly insane. The same word is translated there to describe him as is used by Paul to describe the latter days. And sometimes I get the feeling, am I all alone? Sometimes I get the feeling that there's just a little insanity out there, a little raging insanity, and we're only seeing the leading edge of it. It's going to get worse.
Especially with people like Geraldo. Talking about
now,
raging insanity.
Now, J.R., you're mentioning names.
And scratch that.
Scratch it. Right.
Forget I said it.
Okay.
The thing about it is, the American presidents are not only kin to each other,
yeah,
but they are kin to European royalty. Now, some years ago, I wrote a book entitled Guardians of the Grail and the Men Who Plan to Rule the World. It's a story of the rise of European royalty who believed that they were the family of the Holy Grail. I'm sure you've heard of the legend of the Holy Grail, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and all of that. How that the cup that Jesus drank from on the night before crucifixion became the Grail, or the Holy Grail, that bore the blood of Christ. Well, there is a royal family in Europe who, down through the centuries, have only intermarried cousins with cousins, and they believe that they are divine, that God's blood flows through their veins, that they are the offspring of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. And it has come right down to the American presidents. Even George Washington was kin to the English throne.
And J.R., there are several secret societies of very powerful and wealthy men. I tend to downplay heavy conspiracy theory because I believe the real conspirator is Satan, and he's the one in power. He controls all these conspiracies. But I do believe that there are secret cabals of men behind the scenes who have one goal in mind, and that is that they want to deal themselves as much power as possible. Me first and then you later, you know. After I get mine, then you can have yours. That's their basic motto. And the Antichrist, I think, is going to epitomize this type of thinking. He's going to be the ultimate me first sort of a guy. And he will literally believe that he has the entire world for himself. When you see someone standing up, as did Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, sticking that chin out and telling people that if you'll follow me, there's nothing you can't have. That's what I'm talking about. That's the essence of raw power. And you know, this pride, this hubris, this arrogance has characterized so much of American politics lately, it's very frightening.
In the book of the Revelation, there's the story of a dragon that rises up out of the sea. Now, we feel that this dragon is mostly metaphoric, that this is typology here, that in the language of first century Christianity and first century Judaism, a lot of metaphoric language is used simply because there was not enough vocabulary to put everything in its proper perspective. When it comes to this beast with 7 heads, John writes, "And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" Well, this deadly wound, I've heard preachers say in my growing up years that the Antichrist was going to be killed, that he would receive a wound in the head, and that he would come to life again and then go into perdition.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
It may not be literal, folks. It could be metaphoric. And you know, this fact that our president had a deadly wound that was healed. He came through that impeachment and is alive and well in the office of president today. I may be stretching it, but there's one deadly wound I guarantee you was healed. Absolutely healed.
Well, at any rate, if someone asks you today, is the Antichrist alive right now? You'd probably be safe in saying yes, and not because we can necessarily see him, but because we see the proscribed conditions that must exist before he comes forth.
Again, publicly, we're not prepared to say who or who is not the Antichrist. All we can do is speculate like other men. We'll be back in just a minute.